I was 32 when this happened, and it still messes with me more than a decade later. At the time, I lived in a small town in southern Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone either knows each other or pretends not to. I wasn't the kind of guy to hang out in graveyards, but I had my reasons that day.
My mom had recently passed, and her marker had just been installed at Fairhope Cemetery. The cemetery itself was old, way older than it looked at first glance. A lot of the stones were crumbling or sunken halfway into the ground, especially toward the back.
The sky was an oppressive gray that day, a strange stillness hanging heavy in the air, refusing to stir. My visit was brief, just long enough to clear some leaves from the stone and sit in quiet contemplation. They weren't moving. I mean, not even shifting their weight. They just stood there straight and stiff, almost too still to be natural. I stopped walking and stared a little longer, something gnawing at my stomach. From that distance, I could make out that he was wearing what looked like a uniform. It was dark, sort of dusty blue, with brass buttons, and a long wool coat that looked straight out of a history book. He had this old-fashioned hat on, like the ones soldiers wore in those black and white photos from the 1800s. My first thought was that he was some reenactor or part of a historical society, but why would someone be doing that alone in the middle of a weekday afternoon? So I kept walking. I made it to my car, which was parked just outside the cemetery gates on the dirt shoulder. I gave one last glance back. The guy was gone. The clearing where he had stood was completely empty. No sign of anyone at that point. I still wasn't exactly scared, just confused. Maybe even a little creeped out. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I looked in my rearview mirror and saw something I still can't explain there. Standing on the side of the road behind me was the same man in that old uniform. He wasn't moving, just staring. His face was blank, unreadable, and I swear I don't know how, but he was closer than he should have been, too close for someone. I never passed while driving. I didn't even slow down. I just kept going and told myself. I was imagining things that night. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face in my mind, expressionless and pale, like he hadn't blinked in 100 years. I kept telling myself it was stress, that I'd imagined it because I'd spent too long in that old graveyard still. I ended up dragging a chair to the front window and sitting there till the sky turned blue. I didn't tell anyone at first, honestly. What would I even say that a guy in a Civil War outfit followed me home without actually following me? Even I didn't believe myself, and I was the one living it. But the next morning something happened that made it a lot harder to brush off. There were boot prints in my front yard, not just normal ones either. Deep, perfectly formed prints appeared, leading from the street and stopping abruptly before my porch. They resembled impressions left by heavy, worn leather boots, yet the spacing between steps was unnatural, suggesting an irregular gait. I stood, transfixed, for a long time, searching for an explanation. Rain, perhaps, or a prank, but there was no water, no mud, no indication of anything that could have created the prints, only those inexplicable imprints in the grass and a chilling sensation creeping down my spine. Later that day, I went to the local library to dig into the cemetery's history. I figured maybe if I could make some kind of connection, it would make sense of what I saw. The librarian was this older woman named Carol, who'd worked there since forever. She didn't even flinch when I asked if anyone had ever seen something strange at Fairhope. She said most people didn't go near the back of the graveyard anymore. Too many weird stories, she told me. Visitors hearing whispers, glimpsing figures that disappeared when approached. But one thing stood out. During the Civil War, Fairhope Cemetery had been used as a burial site for unclaimed Union soldiers. Some were never even properly recorded. There was even a small article from 1973 about someone spotting a man in a faded blue uniform wandering the road near the cemetery. That gave me chills. It was too specific to be a coincidence. I photocopied the article and took it home with me. That night, the house felt heavier. I know that sounds weird, but there's no better way to say it. Every creak in the walls felt amplified, and the temperature dropped, like someone had opened a door to the outside. I kept checking my locks, even though I knew I'd already secured them. Then at exactly 3:14 a.m., the doorbell rang. I froze in place when I heard the chime. No one ever visited me that late, and I hadn't ordered anything. I waited a few seconds, heart pounding, hoping it was just a fluke or some glitch, but then it rang again. One long press, deliberate and slow. I crept toward the door and peeked through the peephole. No one, just the porch light casting a dull yellow glow across the empty steps. I didn't open it, obviously. I stood there for minutes, barely breathing, waiting to see if anything else happened. Eventually I walked away, but I didn't feel alone. Just before sunrise, I checked the front yard again. The boot prints were back. This time they led directly to the front door, and they were closer together, like whoever made them had been moving slower. But the most disturbing part, there was only one set. No footprints were left. That day, I drove back to the cemetery, thinking that confronting whatever this was might make it stop. I parked in the same spot, walked the same path, and stopped at the same clearing where I'd first seen him. It was completely quiet again, an eerie silence. I stood there for a while, unsure what I was expecting. Perhaps a feeling, a shift in the air, or simply closure. But after 10 minutes I turned to leave. That's when I saw him again standing by the tree line, closer than before. This time I could see his face clearly. He didn't look angry or ghostly, just tired. His eyes met mine, and he gave this slight tilt of his head, like he was acknowledging me. I don't know why, but I raised my hand just a little, like a wave, and then he turned and walked back into the woods. I never saw him again after that. No more prints, no more doorbell, no more dreams. It was like once I faced him, whatever, held him here, let go. But that doesn't mean I forgot. I think about it more than I care to admit, especially when it gets quiet at night. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever there at all. Maybe he was tied to that place, or maybe to me, like something unfinished had followed me home, just long enough to be seen, and maybe that's all he wanted. Someone to notice, someone to remember. I still avoid Fairhope Cemetery. I don't take that road anymore, even though it's the fastest way across town. I drive the long way around every single time, because even now, years later, I know that if I ever go back, he'll be waiting. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I was 27 when this happened, and I've never looked at dogs or cemeteries the same way since I lived alone, at the time, in a rental house on the outskirts of a small Oregon town. The house wasn't special, but it was cheap and quiet, with a backyard that backed up to a dense patch of woods. Beyond those woods, about 2 blocks away, was an old cemetery most people didn't even realize was there. I found it by accident, really. I was walking my dog Scout through a narrow trail behind the house when we stumbled on it. It was one of those forgotten places, no iron gate or gravel roads, just a crooked wooden sign that read Elden Grove Cemetery. Some of the graves looked sunken, others half covered in moss. There were no fresh flowers anywhere. The first time we went near it, Scout froze. He's a mix of German Shepherd and Husky, usually curious and confident, but he planted his paws and growled low in his throat. At first, I thought maybe he saw a deer or a raccoon, but his eyes were locked dead ahead, staring past the gate. I tugged on the leash, but he wouldn't budge. I figured maybe it was a smell or something animal-related I couldn't sense. We turned around and went home, and I didn't think much of it at the time. But every time after that, Scout would stop dead in his tracks. The second the cemetery came into view, his ears would flatten, tail tucked, and he'd refuse to go any farther. What got weird was how specific he was about it. We could walk next to it, around the side, even behind it. But the front gate, absolutely not. He'd whimper and dig his heels in. Like something inside that fence terrified him. I started avoiding the path altogether. Then, one night, maybe a month later, Scout woke me up. It was just after 3:00 a.m., and he was whining at the back door like he had to get out. That wasn't like him at all. He usually slept through the night. I opened the door thinking he might have heard a coyote or smelled something strange. He didn't bark or hesitate. He suddenly darted into the woods, his leash trailing. I grabbed a flashlight, slipped on my shoes, and chased after him, calling his name. The night forest was profoundly different, eerily quiet, yet unsettlingly alive. I pushed through the undergrowth, guided by the snapping of twigs and rustling leaves, until I saw his destination, the cemetery's front gate, a place he'd always avoided. I slowed down as I approached the fence flashlight, trembling in my hand. The beam cut through the trees, catching the tops of some tilted gravestones beyond the clearing. I called for Scout again, louder this time, expecting to hear rustling or paws on the dirt. But the woods had gone silent too, silent. The old wooden sign creaked softly in the wind, the only sound besides my breath. I aimed the flashlight toward the gate and caught movement quick and low, like something slipping behind one of the taller stones. My heart was pounding. It was too quiet for a dog his size to move like that. I stepped through the gate for the first time. The ground felt weird, soft, and uneven, like it gave slightly beneath my shoes. The graves were barely legible. I swept the flashlight left to right, calling out his name again. Still no sound, no bark, no movement. Then I noticed something that didn't belong. One of the headstones had a leash stretched across the base Scout's leash. He rushed over to it and grabbed it, thinking maybe he'd slipped free. But the clip was still closed, as if it had been unclipped manually. That's what stopped me cold. I started to feel like I wasn't alone out there. That sense you get when someone's behind you, just out of sight. The flashlight flickered for a split second, but it was enough to make me spin around nothing. Just darkness and rows of cold, forgotten stones. I called again, more desperate, now louder than before. Scout, come here, boy. Still nothing. I listened hard. Nothing but wind in the trees, and that faint creaking from the gate behind me. And then I heard breathing, not mine, slow, raspy, and right behind one of the wider headstones. I slowly retreated, keeping the flashlight fixed on the source of the sound, careful not to stumble on the uneven ground. The breathing ceased, yet I felt an intense gaze upon me. That was the most unsettling part. It felt deliberate, as if whatever was there knew me, had been expecting me. Then I heard my dog, but it wasn't a bark. It was a soft, persistent whimper, like he was trapped or injured. But it wasn't coming from in front of me. It was behind. I turned, aiming the flashlight towards the sound, deeper into the cemetery. There was no sign of Scout, only the same distorted rows of gravestones, now indistinct in a mist I hadn't noticed before. The leash still in my hand, but no paw prints, No broken branches, no path. The only thing clear was this. He had walked in here, but there were no signs he'd ever left. I stood frozen, clutching Scout's leash, like it meant something. Now the whimpering had stopped. That silence again. It wasn't natural. Not even bugs. No wind. It was the kind of quiet you only notice when something's completely wrong. I moved forward. Flashlight aimed low. The mist was thicker, now curling around the tombstones like it was alive. I passed one grave that looked freshly disturbed, dirt uneven, like something had been pulled out. I didn't want to look closer, but my legs kept walking. There was something standing up ahead. At first I thought it was a tree stump, until it shifted just slightly. It had the shape of a person, tall, but hunched, like it was waiting. I froze, hoping it hadn't seen me yet. Then it turned its head. I couldn't see its face, just the outline of a head, shoulders, and what looked like fur, a collar. It took a step forward, and the beam of my flashlight caught a splash of something familiar. Scout, but something was wrong with how he moved. His steps were stiff, unnatural. His eyes glowed faintly in the light, not like a dog's, but reflective in a way that made my stomach twist. Then a second shape appeared beside him, taller, thinner, moving in perfect sync. I didn't stay to investigate. I turned and ran, tripping once over a root, but catching myself. The gate was ahead. I could barely see it through the fog, but I knew the way out. As I ran, I felt it again, that breathing closer now, matching my pace. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I burst through the gate, and didn't stop until I reached the road. Lungs burning, the air outside the cemetery felt different, normal again. I looked behind me, expecting Scout to follow, but the road was empty. I came back the next morning, with animal control, and a flashlight in broad daylight. We searched the cemetery, the woods, everywhere. No signs of Scout, not a sound, not even the leash. I was sure I'd brought out with me the cemetery's caretaker. An older man who lives down the road said something strange when I told him where Scout disappeared. He just looked at me and said, "You saw the ones that walked between the graves, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I just left. It's been a year and I still walk that road, sometimes half hoping, half dreading. I still hear him. I avoid the gate now, but sometimes, at night, I wake up and swear I hear him, pacing on the porch, a slow tread, waiting to be allowed inside. My little sister, 5 years old and small for her age, first spoke of the dirt boy when I was 13. She was a soft-spoken child, the kind who drew chalk ghosts on the driveway and conversed with the stuffed animals as if they were alive. We had recently moved into a 2-story colonial house in a small Pennsylvania town. Our backyard bordered an old graveyard, separated by a chain-link fence. Mom always said it was peaceful, historical, even, but it made me uncomfortable. Something about how the tombstones leaned at odd angles, and the trees hung too low, like they were listening. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring out at it longer than I meant to, and when I finally blinked, it always felt like something had blinked back. Our house wasn't new or anything, but it had that smell that told you it had seen things. The basement door creaked, and the upstairs hall light would flicker even after Dad changed the bulb 3 times. But it was the backyard that really got under my skin, especially after Lila started talking to someone out there. At first, it just seemed like she was pretending kids make up imaginary friends all the time. But Lila gave him a name, the Dirt Boy. She said like it was the most normal thing in the world. She'd talk about how he wore brown clothes like the ground, and had hair that never moved. That was the first thing that felt off to me. She never seemed scared of him. In fact, she laughed more when she was with him than with anyone else. One afternoon I asked her where he lived. She pointed past the fence to a sagging headstone, so weathered you couldn't read the name anymore. "That's where he sleeps," she whispered and then skipped off. I told my mom about it, of course, but she brushed it off his imagination. "Better a dirt boy than a scream," she joked, smiling. But it didn't feel funny. That night, I stood at my bedroom window, looking out over the graveyard half, expecting to see a little brown figure staring back. All I saw was the fence and the wind chimes swinging on a windless night. The next day, I saw Lila sitting at the edge of the yard, her legs crossed, whispering to no one. I crept closer to hear what she was saying, but her words didn't make sense, just a soft murmur, like reciting lines from a forgotten nursery rhyme. When she noticed me, she stopped and smiled. "He doesn't like you listening," she said. That night I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about that gravestone and how Lila said he slept there. I remembered the way her eyes looked when she said it, too serious for a 5-year-old. And for the first time since we moved in, I closed my blinds completely, just in case something was staring back. It was about a week later when things started to get worse. Footprints of dirt led from the back door to the foot of Lila's bed, a discovery I made one morning. My parents dismissed them as mud tracked in by Lila, but her socks were clean, and she denied going outside. I chose not to mention the footprints again, but began locking my door at night. My concern wasn't about Lila sleepwalking, but rather what she might invite in. Another morning, I found her at the kitchen table, staring blankly out the back window. She appeared pale and fatigued, as if she hadn't slept at all. "He doesn't like the fence anymore," she murmured. "He wants to come inside." When I pressed her for an explanation, she simply shrugged and picked at her cereal. Later that day, I went out to the backyard alone. The fence had a hole in it, about the size of a small kid slipping through. I tried to tell Dad, but he waved it off like everything else. "We'll patch it this weekend," he said. That night, I woke to the sound of soft tapping on my bedroom wall, not at the window, at the wall. I pressed my ear to it, barely breathing. The tapping stopped. When I did the next morning, Lila was quiet again. She wouldn't even look at me. I asked her what was wrong, and she whispered, "He saw you listening. He doesn't like that." That day, I went out back and stared through the broken fence. I saw nothing but the leaning headstones and dry grass, but it felt like something was watching that night. Lila started sleep talking. At first it was just mumbles, but then I began recognizing words. "Dig," she'd whisper. "Closer. Let me out." I stood in her doorway, listening, afraid to wake her. But what scared me more was when she suddenly laughed, like someone had just told her something funny. On Friday, I stayed home from school. I told Mom I had a stomachache, but I just didn't want to leave Lila alone. Around noon, I caught her outside by the graveyard again. She was sitting near the fence, with her fingers in the dirt, humming that same eerie tune. When I called her name, she flinched, like she'd been caught stealing. I asked her what she was doing. She said helping him dig. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined small hands clawing through the earth, trying to reach the surface. I knew it didn't make sense, but Lila's voice kept echoing in my head, helping him dig. Around 3:00 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hall. I got up and peeked out, expecting to see Mom or Dad, but no one was there. Just the sound of tiny feet shuffling softly on the carpet. I followed the sound slowly until it stopped outside Lila's room. Her door creaked open by itself. She was standing at the window, wide awake. "He's almost here," she said calmly. I asked her who. "The dirt boy," she answered. he said he found the crack. He can come in now. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just make-believe anymore. Whatever was happening had crossed a line. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my room, lights off, listening to every sound the house made. I kept hearing faint scratching, sometimes from the hallway, sometimes from the walls. It was like something was trying to find a way inside. Around 4:00 a.m., I heard the backyard gate creak open. I looked through my window and saw Lila walking toward the cemetery. I rushed downstairs and out the door, yelling her name. She didn't turn around, just kept walking barefoot like she was in a trance. I chased after her, heart-pounding feet cold on the dew-soaked grass. She stopped at one of the graves near the fence and crouched down, whispering to the ground. "He's here," she said. When I reached her, "He's under us." I told her we had to go inside. Now, suddenly the ground beneath us made a sound like shifting dirt, heavy and slow. I pulled her up and backed away, but she stared down at the grave like she was waiting. Then I saw it. A small patch of dirt near the headstone started to cave inward. I grabbed Lila and ran. She screamed, not in fear, but in protest. "You're making him mad," she cried. I didn't stop until we were back inside. I locked the door behind us and took her to our parents' room. They woke up groggy and annoyed, but I didn't care. I told them everything. The grave, the noises, Layla's behavior. Of course, they didn't believe a word. Kids have wild imaginations, Dad said. Layla just stood there, quiet and calm, until she whispered, "You'll believe him when he stands by your bed." That shut everyone up. That shut everyone up. That night I slept with the lights on, but sleep didn't last long. Around 2:00 a.m. I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning slowly. I froze. It turned back and forth, not forced, just like someone unsure of how to enter. Then it stopped. Total silence. I got up and opened the door. No one was there, but the hallway felt colder than the rest of the house. I checked Lila's room. She was in bed, eyes open. She looked at me and whispered, "He's inside now." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't ask what she meant. That was 2 weeks ago. Lila doesn't talk to him anymore. She says he's mad. I pulled her away that night. Now, every few nights, I hear footsteps in the hallway, but they never lead to her room. They stop outside mine, and they always come just before dawn. I don't sleep much anymore. I keep thinking I'll wake up, and he'll finally be standing there, not saying anything, just staring, waiting. The creaking floorboards often make me think of Lila's words. The man buried in the cemetery once lived in our house. At 17, my best friend Malik and I began making videos for fun. We didn't have fancy gear or a large audience, but we enjoyed filming strange, creepy things. Cemeteries quickly became our preferred backdrop, eerie, quiet, and free. What started as a joke soon evolved into something we couldn't quite grasp. Our go-to spot was a small fenced graveyard behind an old church, 2 blocks from Malik's house. It didn't have gates, just a narrow dirt path, lined with crooked headstones. We'd go after sunset, when the lighting was low, and shadows made everything look 10 times creepier. The silence out there always made me feel like we were being watched. The first few nights were normal skits, ghost hunting, parodies, fake screams. We'd edit in weird sounds and glitches later to mess with viewers. But one clip stood out. Malik was filming me running between headstones. When I felt something cold brush past my neck, it made me stop and look behind me. Malik thought I was just acting and laughed, but when we replayed the footage later, my face dropped behind me. Between 2 gravestones was something standing still, pale, tall and blurry, not like a person, more like a stretched figure. It disappeared the second the camera moved. We tried debunking it, maybe a trick of the light or the lens messing up. But when I paused the video at just the right frame, I could see its eyes. They were too round, too wide, and almost glowing white. Malik got quiet. That was the first time I saw him nervous. We didn't post that video. It just felt wrong, like putting it online would bring something we couldn't undo. Instead, we promised not to go back there for a while. But a week later, Malik texted me, "Bro, look at this." Attached was a photo from his phone. That same figure, this time closer. I called him instantly, but he didn't answer. I went over to his house and found him pacing his room. He said he didn't take the photo. It just appeared in his gallery between regular pictures. It wasn't even a video. He whispered, "Just showed up this morning. I think it's watching us." I laughed it off, trying to lighten the mood, but the pit in my stomach was growing. I couldn't sleep that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes again, wide, motionless, and waiting. I started to wonder if we disturbed something that wasn't meant to be seen. The next few days felt off. Malik stopped replying to texts as quickly and wasn't online much. When we did talk, his messages were shorter, like he didn't want to say too much. I figured he was just spooked, or maybe trying to mess with me. But then he sent another picture. This one was a frame from our old footage. It wasn't the clip we reviewed though. It was one we never even saved. The figure was in this one too. Closer again. Its face was still blurry, but now I could see the outline of its hand pressed to a stone. That didn't make sense. I knew we never uploaded that file. Never even watched it. Malik swore he didn't edit anything. It's like it's pulling itself into everything he said, like it's inside the footage. I didn't know what to say. All I knew was I didn't want to film anymore. One night, I woke up to static on my phone. Loud, sharp, like from a VHS. My screen was black, except for flashes of the cemetery. But I hadn't played any video. I closed the app, but it kept playing, the volume rising on its own. That was the first time I truly got scared. I immediately texted Malik, but the message failed to send. Instead, I received a chilling reply from his number. A single photo. It was an image of my bedroom window, taken from the street outside, illuminated by a nearby lamp. Behind the glass, a tall silhouette stood facing inward. I froze, unable to move or even breathe. I remained in bed until sunrise, paralyzed by fear. When I finally dared to look, there were no footprints beneath the window. The next morning, just loose dirt and small indentations. I told myself they were animal tracks, but in the middle of the trail, there were long, narrow marks, like fingers dragged through the soil. Malik finally called that afternoon. He sounded exhausted. "I haven't slept," he said quietly. "Every time I try, I see him not in dreams, in the dark parts of my room. He just stands there." His voice cracked. "And I don't think he's from the cemetery. I think he followed us home." I didn't want to believe it, but something was wrong. Our dumb little hobby had turned into something neither of us could explain. We tried going back to the graveyard during the day, thinking maybe facing it would help, but it didn't look the same anymore. It felt heavier, almost distorted. The air was thicker. The wind didn't move. The trees are near the spot we always filmed. The grass was dead in a perfect circle. Malik bent down to look at it, but I didn't want to get close. Something about that space made my skin crawl, like the ground was breathing beneath us. Malik told me not to talk about the circle when we got home. Ignore it. He said, "That's what it wants." That phrase stuck with me. What it wants. I never asked what it was, and I don't think he could have answered if I did. Later that night, I was reviewing our first ever graveyard clip. Something had changed in it. In the distance behind us, a second pair of legs walked the path, only visible for a few frames. But we'd been alone that day. I was sure of it. I paused the video and scrubbed frame by frame. The legs stopped mid-step and then vanished. No fade, no blur, just gone. I didn't tell Malik. I didn't even want to confirm it was real. That small detail made everything worse. 2 nights later, Malik stopped answering again. I biked to his house the next afternoon. His car was still in the driveway, but his curtains were shut and no one came to the door. I thought about calling his parents, but they'd moved 2 months ago. He lived alone. Upon finally reaching his window, I peered into his room. His laptop screen was open, frozen on a video player displaying a cemetery thumbnail. Malik, however, was nowhere to be found, and the room appeared untouched for days. The front door was unlocked, so I stepped inside calling his name, but received no reply. The air felt stale and quiet, like a vacuum. His room was empty, the bed untouched. I walked over to the laptop. The video was paused at the exact moment we'd first captured the figure, only now it filled the entire screen. I closed the laptop and left. I didn't call the cops. I couldn't explain what was happening. I told myself he'd gone somewhere, that maybe he was trying to break, whatever this was, but I knew deep down he wasn't coming back. I haven't heard from him since weeks have passed. The cemetery is sealed, now fenced off by the city for maintenance, but I know that's not why, and sometimes when I pass by, I swear I see something in the dead patch of grass, like the outline of someone lying flat, arms at their sides. I stopped filming. I deleted everything from our channel, but it's not gone. Sometimes when my phone screen flickers, I catch a reflection that doesn't match my face, or I hear footsteps when I'm reviewing clips. I know I erased whatever this is. It followed me too.